There are video game consoles that are mind-blowingly good, light years ahead of their time, and capable of revolutionizing both the gaming world and our very lives. And then there's systems that look like this. Look, not every video game console makes it off of the drawing board. In fact, not every console that does make it off of the drawing board should. In today's video, we're going to discuss 9 video game systems that never made it into mainstream production. First, I need to start with this thing, the Konix Multisystem. In all fairness, this system, which first premiered in 1989, wasn't exactly a video game system, so I guess I'm starting this video by breaking my own rules, but that's a completely different story. The Konix Multisystem, as the name implies, was developed by Konix. Konix was a British company that made computer accessories and peripherals, including joysticks. Thinking bigger, in 1989, Konix debuted this thing. The multisystem basically took a series of controls, including joysticks, controllers, gears, pedals, and more. The entire design, codenamed the Slipstream, could be altered and configured based on the game you played. The system promised to have a variety of additional features. It would have contained some majorly advanced hardware, including 1 megabyte of RAM, a 16-bit processor, 256 colors, and a state-of-the-art sound system, as well as the graphics to compete with systems like the Amiga or Atari ST. It even went as far as saying it would provide for force feedback, which, if successful, would have made it the first commercially available system to have these benefits. Games would have come on 3.5-inch floppy disks, which also would have been different. A prototype made its premiere at a 1989 toy fair, and news articles were written on the system touting its potential. Something resembling media hype began to build. And honestly, who can blame the media for this one? As you can imagine, the system sounds awesome. Of course, it was also too good to be true. Memory limitations slowed the games, and the release date kept being pushed back. Finally, news broke that Konix had run out of money. The Konix Multisystem never made it out of the starting gate. Next, we have the Nintendo PlayStation? Yeah, nope, that was the thing. I actually did a separate video on this one ages ago, but in a nutshell, the PlayStation was almost produced by Nintendo. It's a wild story. It's 1988. Nintendo rules the video game world and has published the wildly successful Nintendo Entertainment System, soon to publish the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. While their cartridges were successful, better and more effective technology existed in the form of CD-ROMs. Realizing their potential, Nintendo and Sony entered into a 1988 agreement whereby Sony agreed to produce a CD-ROM attachment to the Super Nintendo. The deal would have provided Sony with a ton of revenue and given them a foothold in the video game industry. However, money became a problem. Nintendo's deal with Sony would have given Sony more licensing revenue than the company had ever before negotiated away, and Nintendo quickly began to have second thoughts. Unable to renegotiate a deal to their liking, Nintendo began secret negotiations with Philips, a Dutch company, to make the CD-ROM attachment. At the 1991 Consumer Electronics Show, Nintendo blindsided Sony and announced the deal with Philips. The agreement between Sony and Nintendo ended in 1992. Now, that being said, don't feel too bad for Sony. The Compact Disc Interactive, the result of the partnership between Nintendo and Philips, never made the aforementioned CD-ROM add-on, but because of Nintendo and Philips' agreement, Philips made some truly horrendous Zelda games. Sony turned around and produced this system called the PlayStation. Maybe you've heard of it. Speaking of systems that were ahead of their time, let's discuss the Infinium Labs Phantom. This system gets huge credit for having the right idea at the wrong time, and definitely with the wrong company. First, again, kind of breaking my rules because the Infinium Labs Phantom wasn't exactly a console. The system was first announced via press release in January 2003, with the company's CEO, Timothy Roberts, saying that the Phantom would deliver games through an on-demand model and via a subscription service. Sounds an awful lot like, well, Steam. In fact, Steam actually launched in September 2003, so this system was clearly onto something. As designed, the system would have allowed users a large amount of space to download games. However, users would have to pay for both the console, which was at a price of, quote, below $3.99, and a monthly subscription fee of $9.99. That was a lot, particularly in an era where customers expected to be able to purchase the system or pay for a subscription, not do both. The system was supposed to go on sale in August 2003 and missed the deadline. Okay, fine. New deadline, first quarter 2004. Nope. Once more, new deadline, November 2004. Nope. January 2005. March 2005. Nope. None of these were working. If you're detecting a theme, you are a uniquely perceptive listener. During all this time, the system had allegedly failed to develop software for online games delivery, failed to find retailers, or acquired the rights for any games. But other than that, it was good to go. Very quietly, the system disappeared from the Phantom Entertainment website in 2006. In May of 2006, the company's CEO, Timothy Roberts, was accused of running a pump and dump scheme. He used the Phantom to pump up the stock of Infinium Labs, then sold $400,000 in stock while the price rose. Roberts was also sued by company investors and ultimately settled with the U.S. Security Exchange Commission. He would restart his career with Savtira, a cloud commerce startup, only to be convicted of fraud in 2017. So you should probably stop giving money to this guy. Next, the Taito Wowow. Wowwow? This. And as you can tell by the name, we're in for a real treat. The Wowwow, and I think I'm pronouncing that right, was a partnership between Taito, the Japanese satellite TV network Wowwow, and ASCII, which was a satellite communications company. So if you know anything about Taito, you know that they are an arcade company. They have produced some arcade legends, including Space Invaders, Bubble Bobble, and Elevator Action. The Wowwow would have contained arcade system boards that were very similar to those used in Taito arcade machines, meaning that the system would have been capable of playing Taito games with extreme authenticity. And that wasn't the only thing about the system that made it so futuristic. The system also had a CD-ROM. Buyers could have purchased games and played them just like any other computer system. The Wowwow wouldn't have been the first system to use a CD-ROM. That honor goes to the TurboGrafx CD, which first came out in 1987 and 1989, but it would have been among the first. Keep in mind that this was also 2 years before the PS1 came out in Japan, so the Wowwow was ahead of its time. The system also would have contained a satellite receiver. That receiver could access games via the Wowwow network, meaning that, in theory, games would have been either downloadable or playable online. In fact, a 1992 article noted that the system would have been subscription-based and charged players for the time they spent to play. In other words, this system was a massive amalgamation of a variety of features that really weren't available in the 90s. Prototypes were produced, and the system made its debut at the 1992 Tokyo Game Show. And that was it. The system disappeared. Two issues killed the Wowwow. First, there was the tech. Simply put, the satellite wasn't speedy or reliable enough to play games. Furthermore, the system, a combination video game system and satellite receiver, would have been prohibitively expensive. Alright, so you can't talk about canceled systems without talking about Sega, which had more half systems and canceled programs than most people have fingers. Okay, I'm exaggerating. Kind of. Let's start with the Sega Pluto. This alternate version of the Saturn was designed with a CD-based slot for games, a cartridge slot, and a netlink modem, which would have allowed for internet-based play, something that Sega actually first brought to life with the Dreamcast, not the Saturn. So, what do I know about the Pluto? This might actually be it. Indeed, what might be most interesting about the Pluto is not just its existence, but how the world found out about it. Little, if anything, was known about the Pluto before 2013 when a former Sega employee revealed its existence on the Assembler Games forum. What was revealed was the details we listed above. We also found out a little bit more in terms of the size of the system, which was 9 by 3.5 by 14 inches big, and it weighed about 5 pounds. Furthermore, only 2 to 6 prototypes were ever produced, and the system was region locked for North America. There were also 2 controller slots, a power button, and a reset button. And it gets even weirder. Apparently, the owner of the Pluto, who only identified themselves by their online handle of KidVid666, found the device at a flea market where he negotiated the price down from $5 to $1. He tried to sell it on Game Gavel for $7,600 and eBay for $15,500, though both sales did not meet the reserve price. No word on what happened to this prototype. But a second prototype wound up in the hands of Adam Koralik, a YouTuber who specializes in video game repairs and reviews. He modded the system and actually got it working. The link to that video is in the description if you're interested. Sega also produced the better known but still aborted Sega Neptune. At least this system makes a little bit more sense. If you've seen my other videos on Sega, you know that we've discussed their horrendous strategic decisions in the past. These decisions included the manufacturing of the 32X, which was basically an add-on to the original Sega Genesis. Perhaps realizing that selling an add-on to a system was a dumb idea, Sega came up with a slightly less bad idea, which was to combine the two systems into one weird-looking system. Thus, the Sega Neptune was born. As designed, the Neptune would have allowed for Saturn and 32X games to be played. This would have been a boon for both systems. Indeed, at the time of the proposed release, late 1995, the Genesis was still doing relatively well, but the 32X wasn't, with only 40 games having been created for the system. The Neptune, also called the Genesis 32X system in some magazine ads, saw price increases over time, with its initial price of $149 rising to $220. So, what happened? Well, once again, Sega tripped over themselves. Somehow, they seem to have forgotten that they already had a major system coming out, the Saturn, between 1994 and 1995 across the world. Rather than release two systems at roughly the same time, the Sega leaned into the Saturn, and the Sega Neptune was scrapped. Prototypes were found, again, by Adam Koralik. Again, link in the description. Literally 6 days before I started researching this video, the Metro, a British newspaper, noted that the Brazilian company GameScare was producing their very own Sega Neptune. The Master System, which is the precursor to the Genesis, remains popular and manufactured in Brazil, so it makes sense that you'd find the Neptune there. As of this moment, the system has not been released and there is no price available. Speaking of space-related consoles, let's discuss the Atari Cosmos. The idea behind the Cosmos was to make holograms. No, I'm not kidding. We have a hard time with that today, but in 1978, yeah. It took 3 years before a prototype system was produced, but the system first made its debut at the 1981 New York Toy Fair. Critical reception was decidedly negative, with many critics arguing that the holograms actually took away from the gameplay itself. However, orders were coming in, and the Atari got 8,000 pre-sales. Here's where things get confusing. 9 games were produced, but most of these games actually ran on the system's 2D LED screen. Games typically only had 1 to 2 holograms. The holograms were being advertised as 3D and lifelike, but that was a stretch to put it politely. In general, the system seemed like a decent handheld system, but it didn't offer much beyond the so-called holograms. Alan Alcorn, who invented Pong, was heavily invested in the creation and development of the Cosmos. In a signed letter, Alcorn said that Atari's marketing had no desire to sell the Cosmos, as they were already maxing out all possible efforts to the Atari VCS. Despite the pre-sale success, Ray Kassar, CEO of Atari, refused to release the product. Alcorn resigned shortly thereafter, deciding that he had no future at a company that refused to support his innovations. There are, as of this moment, only 6 known copies of the Atari Cosmos prototypes. Believe it or not, 3 of them work. In 2010, a copy of the Cosmos was sold on eBay for $7,500. A March 2024 copy, one directly from Alcorn himself, sold for $25,900. All was not lost for the Cosmos. See, in the course of creating the system, Alcorn and Company invented a way to make holograms for pennies by embossing mylar onto a surface. The technology was subsequently used by American Banknote to create credit cards. Next, let's talk about the GameMaster. The story behind this one reads like either a cash grab or a prank. The developer of the GameMaster was Active Enterprises. At the time of the public announcement of the Action GameMaster, which took place at Winter's 1994 Consumer Electronics Show, Active had already achieved a level of infamy thanks to its production of the Action 52 multi-cart. This multi-cart, produced for the Nintendo and Sega in 1991, contained 52 games on one cartridge. And the games were almost uniformly terrible. The graphics were bad, the gameplay was appalling, and in many cases, the games were straight up broken, unplayable, or crashed. The game launched with the prize win $104,000 for hitting level 5 of the game Ooze. Of course, the game crashed after level 2, so, that was tough. With this stellar reputation in hand, the Action GameMaster was released. It was a portable system that sat on top of a flight yoke. You could buy separate adapters that ensured you'd be able to play games from other systems, including Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Genesis, and CD-ROMs. And that was in addition to proprietary games like Cheetah Men 3. Okay. And then, nothing. No, seriously, nothing. No information was ever given about the system or its cancellation. Active Enterprises left the video game industry in 1994 and returned to the computer industry. And finally, the Ultravision Video Arcade System. And this is another one you can file under would have been really, really cool, but was way, way, way too ahead of its time. The year is 1982, and the market is dominated by the Atari 2600. Ultravision, a video game developer, releases an ad that discusses their upcoming 2600 games, including Condor Attack and Karate. They make this announcement via an advertisement in the November 1982 edition of Electric Games. They also show this. This was the world premiere for the Ultravision Video Arcade System, or VAS. Additional print ads would go into more detail. The VAS was 3 separate things in one machine. First, it was a home console system. That would have been supported by 12 games, including Karate, Quest for the Idol, and Phoenix. It would have been sold with joysticks and allowed for 2 players. Next, the VAS would have been a television, one capable of supporting up to 84 channels and receiving CCTV data. Finally, the system also would have been sold with 64 kilobytes of RAM, access to numerous programming languages, and an optional add-on keyboard. In other words, you've got a full-fledged multimedia system. So, what happened? Unfortunately, no one really knows. There were a bunch of print ads, yes, and maybe some prototypes, but the Ultravision VAS ultimately faded into obscurity. No prototype was ever actually found, no pre-orders were taken, and no further announcement was ever made. Speculation is that Ultravision didn't have the money to support making such a system, which, given the newness of the technology, would have been incredibly expensive. In some cases, the systems featured here were just blatant cash grabs. In other cases, like the Ultravision, the Cosmos, or the Wowwow, the ideas were great. The problem was that they were too great, too ahead of their time to be supported by available technology. We've come a long way since then, but canceled systems can still bring us fascinating insight into what would have been, and with better tech, what could have been.